welcome everyone to our webinar today on what to expect in 2025, trends and tips in industrial. I'm Kendall Parks and I'll be moderating, and I have my colleagues joining me today, Kelly Switt and Frances Chow, and I will turn it over to them to quickly introduce themselves. Frances, maybe if you want to start.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Frances Chow. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of the Edge Business Unit at Red Hat. Just a quick intro of my background. I am an engineer by training. I started my career designing chips in the semiconductor industry. Spent about 20 years in that industry on a wide variety of roles. And then I moved to enterprise software in the last 8 or so years, focusing on scaling and building new businesses. And most recently, trying to help Red Hat to move to the edge market.
And my name's Kelly Switt. I am responsible for our business expansion within Edge, and I am the counterpart to Frances. So the way that I would kind of look at it is, like, especially with my background, I have been much more focused in the business side of things, long history in financial services before I came to Red Hat. And then I have worked over the past 6 years inside of Red Hat to start setting up new businesses that we're looking to expand, including what we're doing in the Edge business with Frances, and in particular, industrial.
Awesome. Well, so I'm really excited about today's topic because, it's an exciting time in industrial. There's massive transformation happening. We read about it, we talk about it at Red Hat. And I thought, just to get us started, Frances, maybe if you could start us off and just kind of give some context of, what are those key themes that we're seeing related to transformation in the market? And, also, what are you predicting and thinking about as we move into 25?
I think what we see happening in the market is that some of these industrial systems are getting to a point that is getting too complex and too costly for them to add new capabilities, such as AI, to leverage real-time data for the system, to be updated and maintained for the long haul in a scalable way, and to guard against cybersecurity risk, right? And a lot of companies who are creating and designing these industrial systems, or what we call operations technology or OT systems, are trying to find ways to address these challenges. Now, coming from an IT background, who've been spending a lot of time talking to industrial customers in the past couple of years, what we've recognized is that a lot of these challenges in the OT space have actually been solved with IT techniques in the last 5 to 10 years. But now what happens, though, is for most of these companies, just the way the company was built, there's not a lot of coordinations between the IT department and the OT department, which makes it hard to leverage these techniques or technologies. So now enters Red Hat. We've been a pretty successful company in the IT space. And with the last couple of years, we are investing a lot and building up the expertise in the industrial. So what I think is going to happen is with companies like Red Hat, we can help accelerate the convergence between OT and IT. Now, specifically, what predictions or trends that we see happening this year, I think a couple of things. Right? Number one, I think we're going to see the software infrastructure getting more modernized from legacy systems, so that we can take advantage of new capabilities like containers or AI. In the industrial space. I think a lot of these systems are being managed manually. So we are going to see a more visible change to more use of automations in the systems. And last but not least, Linux is already quite pervasive in industrial systems. Oftentimes, they're sort of used in a bespoke way. There are multiple distributions, which gets very difficult to maintain and update, especially for cybersecurity in the long haul. So I think what we're going to see this year is a consolidation of these Linux distributions and a move towards enterprise-grade, commercially supported Linux systems.
Great. So, playing off of that, Kelly, maybe you could give us your view specifically as it relates to, what's driving some of these things. We've talked about OT to IT and, automation. So, what are you seeing in the market that's driving some of these themes that Francis spoke to?
I think you did a great job, Francis, highlighting exactly what we're starting to see. I think a big reason for some of these changes and why they're looking for this, Kendall, is if you think about the world's data and everyone talking about AI, right? You can't go anywhere, even in your personal life, without hearing about AI. Without like the only way to get to AI, it has to be enabled with obviously data, and almost 40% of the world's data is actually coming from the manufacturing sector. So the supply chain, right? And the way we think about how things are built and how we may consume them as consumers in our markets. And so in order for them to be able to get to even this data, they have not really had a revolution since late 70s or early 80s and having these proprietary systems. And so there is a need as these companies are looking for, how do I become more efficient? How do I produce more product, right? How do I handle the challenges of the aging labor force? In order for them to do those things, they need all the things that Francis was talking about. They need to become more software defined. They have to start looking at new ways of automating what we would consider traditionally like business processes, but actually can be leveraged. You can leverage even IT automation practices in order for them to be able to achieve some of those goals. But in addition to that, the way that these companies have always operated is to think about security less like how IT does and more like what we like to call like almost like the Iron Dome, right? You apply security and control around what you do versus having it inherently or intrinsically embedded in what you do. And so there's been government mandates that have been put out around getting to better security standards. And so you start getting this like a number of kind of market forces really pushing them to have to change. And the only way for them to really be able to do that is they have to, what IT would call, modernize. Now, in some instances, that may mean they have to buy new systems, new control systems that run their shop floor. In other instances, it may be they all have a factory data center. They may need to modernize the factory data center with new hardware. And to Francis's point, I need to kind of think about how do I, as much as we may not like the term, right, future-proof myself and get to like a platform-based business. And so a lot of the discussions we're having is around getting to that platform style management. And even as like, it doesn't mean you have to go and buy everything new. There is actually a way to kind of coexist what is kind of your traditional or your brownfields. They call it brownfield quite a bit. The brownfield estate with what is the greenfield. And Red Hat has strategies for that in the offerings that we're starting to pull together for this market.
Awesome. And so, related, Kelly, to speaking on AI and the need, I think you quoted 40% of the data is coming from manufacturing. Obviously, this is fueling the need for edge computing, right? Could you speak a little bit to, what the role of edge computing is related to the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So the things that we are doing around how do we get to the data, right? Because the data is the enabler to even be able to do things like AI. We have a number of partners even in our ecosystem that we've worked with. It starts with even being able to get to a place of, can you get access to the data in your brownfield systems today? And how do you set up those data pipelines in order to then be able to get better insights, analytics, intelligence on where you're trying to go as a business? And so part of what we have been doing with a number of manufacturers across the globe is helping them set up even just like a basic strategy around data movement. In some instances, they may be using some of our middleware products to help with that. So Kafka and the MQ systems that we have. In other instances, it may be our partner. But what becomes really important is that that's critical data. So there's a need to have it in a highly available way that we have good data security around it. So having a solid baseline of a platform, whether that be just the foundational Linux or leveraging our Kubernetes-based platform, so a container-based platform, to help with that data movement, is a big piece of how we're kind of enabling them to get to the step of being able to start their journey with AI.
Oh, I totally agree with Katie, because if you think about how much data is being used in industrial systems today, right? It's like 5%. Right?
Yeah.
If it's real time, maybe even kind of less, like in the 1% range. But data is intelligence, right? If you don't incorporate the intelligence that you have, right? Think about how much utilized, right, your systems could be. And think about the possibilities, what you can do when you actually bringing your own full intelligence into your own production systems.
Yep. So much opportunity there. So, and thank you for that great explanation, both of you. So, obviously the need to modernize is there. And, there may be some folks that are watching that are just thinking about getting started. And I wonder if one of you could give your tips on, how should they begin if they're thinking about starting this journey? What are some of the things that they should be thinking about?
Francis, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
I can start, right? I think you already kind of touched on this a little bit, Katie, which is about the data part. Mm-hmm. I think companies needs to kind of think about the investments in data engineering, because without good data, what you're going to end up having is, for some of these new AI models, you're going to have a garbage in, garbage out situation.
Yep.
So I think companies can start investing on preparing the data, cleaning the data, in such a way that when data is organized and structured, it becomes a lot easier to integrate AI into the operational flow of the systems. What else are you seeing, Kenny?
So the other piece that I would add, because I talked to our team about this quite a bit, at the end of the day, systems exist to represent the people and how an organization operates. And so if you're looking to modernize, and to Francis's point, being able to think differently about how you may even have access to the data or leverage the data, then you have to kind of start thinking about, it's not just a tool. How are we really starting to modernize the way that people are working? So when we think about it, even from a platform perspective, the platforms that we provide, a lot of it is providing the conventions on how people work and how do you create those automated workflows. And so it becomes really important to think about not how we do things today, but how do we want to do things tomorrow? And then how do we set those baseline conventions of how we want to operate and manage ourselves into the tech in order to enable that growth? Because at the end of the day, the data engineers and the pieces that Francis talked about that are really critical to the long-term success, they need to be enabled by another set of folks within the organization that can help to start streamline the operations of managing the tech inside the organization, so that way they can be enabled to run as fast as possible within their data engineering space.
Great. So maybe one last question, Kelly, if you want to take this one. So, we've talked about the modernization, and we know that, you've given some great tips on getting started. There is obviously a couple of different paths that you can take still, right? So, where are some places that you see companies who are modernizing? Like, where are they investing?
Right now, where I see them investing is starting with the factory data center. And in reality, this is kind of like Francis brought it up before. It really is kind of like the fulcrum for where some of the IT best practices can start filtering into the way that they think about managing their factory in the future. Because most likely, whether it's an on-site IT team or it's the central IT team, the IT organization already has a role that they play within the way that that factory data center runs. So we tend to see a lot of the motions start there, with people trying to think differently about, I'm just not going to be in a virtualization game anymore. I need to think about platform and what's my platform strategy. And so I think that's a great place to start, because it's common ground that brings the IT as well as the operations technology teams together, and for them to start thinking differently about what that kind of hub really needs to be. Because that factory data center really is kind of like the hub that starts the way that they think about how the factory will execute, because all the systems that tend to run in that data center are the production planning and the execution systems, thinking about how to give the direction to what is the shop floor. And so that's a great place to start building some of those practices. And then when we build those best practices, we can talk about how do you now translate those best practices to the smaller components that run the shop floor, and feel a little bit more confident, because the closer and closer you get to the shop floor, the more risk aversion you have, because it's literally running the body shop, it's running the paint shop. So that's kind of where I would say people should start.
Awesome. Francis, any thoughts there?
I definitely agree with what Kelly said. I would add that, right, Kelly actually touched upon two things, right? One is the products, right? How do you modernize your product infrastructure kind of to make your life easier? And then there's a process point of view, right? You have to also think about how you leverage your design process to leverage these capabilities on new products. But I will add one more thing. I think companies also need to kind of think about how they organize. Because in the
Yes.
end, right, the culture, the organization, and process and products got to work together to make transformation happen.
Great. Thank you both for your time. You've given us some great perspective, and I think some great tips to be thinking about. So with that, we will conclude, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.